Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, House Bill 1177, the companion to my Senate Bill 506, provides protections when leaving Texans protections when leaving their homes during a disaster. Currently, it's illegal to carry handguns without a license to carry. This puts those in disaster areas in a challenging position where they can choose to stay in the disaster area or leave for safety. However, if they do not have a license to carry, they may be putting themselves at risk by leaving their homes without personal firearm protection, not to mention those being some of the most valuable items that they own in their possession. Also, they would be leaving their firearms vulnerable to looters. To address this predicament, House Bill 1177 would allow Texans to temporarily transport their handguns when evacuating from a disaster area. This will allow them to keep their valuable possessions and to get to a safe area during threatening times. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Huffman and her staff for working with me on a committee substitute to offer today.
Senator Creighton sends up the committee substitute.
Committee substitute would make this exemption only applicable during a mandatory evacuation order and the subsequent 48 hours following. The substitute would also give the governor authority to extend this time period if needed. The individual in this scenario would have the opportunity to carry the firearm concealed, and this would not apply to those prohibited by state and federal law to possess a firearm. And thank you, Madam Chair and members, for your consideration.
Thank you, Senator Creighton. Do we have any questions of Senator Creighton at this time? Okay, we'll open public testimony on the committee substitute to House Bill 1177. Tara? Hi, you're recognized. Couldn't see you back there.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, committee members, Tara Mitchell with NRA testifying in support of House Bill 1177. This bill would offer temporary protection to honest Texans whose licenses to carry are lost or damaged due to flood, wind, or fire, and to those who didn't have a license to carry because they never envisioned a need to transport or carry their handgun outside their home until a disaster occurs. We want them to be able to safely and securely transport their handguns away from potential looters who would pose a danger to first responders during a disaster. This measure passed the House by a wide margin and with bipartisan support, and we hope this committee will also give it favorable consideration. I had one concern I wanted to express about the language, and maybe this is something we can work on between committee and the floor if this bill advances. The language on first page, lines 12 through 14, ties the protections in the bill to circumstances where somebody is evacuating from an area following a mandatory evacuation order issued during a state of disaster declared under government code or a local state of disaster. Oftentimes, even though there's a declaration of disaster, there's no accompanying mandatory evacuation order. Such as that's what the case was with Houston. We're pleased that the bill's being considered in committee and hope it moves forward, but maybe that's something we can talk about between here and the floor.
Any other questions? Comments? Oh. Move on to Luis Witchers. And I'm sorry if I messed up your name there.
You're good.
Good.
My name is Louis Witchers. I represent Texas Gun Sense. As an organization, we are neutral on this bill. This bill is supposed to be modeled on Florida statutes 790.01. The Florida law refers to evacuation only and has no verbiage allowing firearms into a shelter. So our position is, as long as the bill remains in that standard, that it copies the Florida equivalent, and it only refers to evacuation and firearms, then we have no objection or opposition to it. I spent 44 years of my life in Florida, so in Florida, all God's children get a hurricane, so we're very familiar with hurricanes and these types of orders. When I looked at multiple websites, there were in Florida for emergency shelters, alcohol, illegal drugs, weapons, and firearms are not allowed in emergency shelters. So that's our point. As long as it follows the Florida standard strictly, word by word, we have no objection to it.
Thank you. Kenneth Gibson?
Thank you. I'm an LTC instructor and representing myself today. And I have a license to carry a handgun in Texas, but 4 years ago I also had the experience of having my house destroyed. I was actually sitting in the house when it happened. And leaving a destroyed home, I can assure you, is a very vulnerable position to find yourself in. Now, I was able to legally carry a handgun to protect myself and my wife. I was able to legally transport handguns from a destroyed house. But I hate to think what it would have been like to add to the trauma of a destroyed home, the stress of worrying about being prosecuted because my LTC got destroyed or lost in a tornado, or because I simply chose not to acquire a license. And tell me if this is inappropriate, but I would like to add that the law that's being proposed here, this 1177, would not have addressed me because there was no, disaster declared there. If it was possible to expand the language to include, definitely I had a disaster, but if the language could be expanded to include situations like that, I would appreciate that too. But in order to support citizens' rights in natural disasters, I urge you to support House Bill 1177.
All right, thank you. Rick Briscoe? Oh, well, he's not up here. What is your name, sir?
Mike Cox.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Mike Cox, and I'm representing myself in support of House Bill 1177. I'm from Kemah, Texas. It's located on Galveston Bay between Houston and Galveston. And during my life in Kemah, my family had to evacuate 4 times due to approaching hurricanes and seek shelter inland until the storm passed. We lost our home during one of those hurricanes, and the cleanup after a hurricane is always chaotic. It's always stressful and depressing. I'm also a member of a Texas 1 DMAT team, Disaster Medical Assistance Team, and have been deployed to many disaster sites during the last 12 years. I'm also a member of a Baptist men's group that does disaster relief to victims of storms. So I'm present at these things during and after. House Bill 1177 is a good bill that allows people to take their firearms with them during evacuations without fear of arrest or complications while evacuating. I'm a certified airboat operator, and I evacuated people in Dickinson, Texas during a recent hurricane. And we had local law enforcement giving us all kinds of instructions. No pets, you can't evacuate any pets. No guns allowed, things like that. We just ignored them because people won't leave without their pets, and people get in our boats with all kinds of things they carry with them. We're not going to turn them down. Thank you, Representative Phelan and Senator Crichton. Thank you very much for sponsoring this valuable bill, and which allows Texans to protect themselves and their loved ones and to transport their legally owned handguns lawfully. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Briscoe?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I am Rick Briscoe, appearing on behalf of Open Carry Texas in support of this much-needed legislation. There are a couple of potential issues with it that I foresee, though. The bill addresses disasters, and there are also emergencies with limited mandatory evacuations, such as the recent chemical fires in Houston, where smaller areas were evacuated, where the same risks are involved of looting and so on. We would urge inclusion of emergencies as well as disasters involving mandatory evacuations. The other area of concern is the designation of shelters. In our experience, individuals took persons evacuating an area into their homes, and they surely are unlikely to meet the definition proposed in the bill. There are non-governmental organizations, churches, businesses, all kinds of people who stepped up during Harvey to provide a place for people to stay. We see some issues there too. During Harvey at the Brown Center, the Houston police violated both federal and state law in seizing firearms and conducting warrantless searches. There's video from the local TV stations of these poor people with all their worldly possessions in a clear plastic bag and the police rummaging through it. I question how well law enforcement will carry out the intent of the legislature on this bill, which makes it all the more needed. And we'd be pleased to discuss the matter with anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to this panel. Thanks for being here. We'll call up the next panel. Amy Turney, Elva Mendoza, and CJ Grisham. Okay, Amy Turney.
Hi. My name is Amy Turney, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters testifying against House Bill 1177, and also for the League of Women Voters of Texas. We're testifying against House Bill 1177. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for all their work on this bill. However, this proposed legislation allows unlicensed persons to carry a handgun for 48 hours or more once a state of disaster has been declared. Texans whose licenses are lost or damaged due to flood, wind, or fire need not worry, since House Bill 2730, passed in 2009, changed Texas Code Chapter 411 by eliminating the offense and possibility of license suspension for failure to display a license to carry a handgun. Therefore, licensed law-abiding citizens will not be subject to a fine or penalty or find themselves in jeopardy of losing their license by suspension should their LTC be lost or destroyed as a result of a disaster. And as you can see, I provided that verbiage from the bill. The question was raised about the number of non-licensed persons carrying handguns charged with offenses during a state of disaster when testimony was given for the bill in the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee of the House of Representatives on March 6th. No one could provide an incident. NRG Center in Houston has a cash room, as does the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, and therefore were able to safely secure weapons after Hurricane Harvey. The owners were provided with a receipt and were able to retrieve them when they left the shelter. They were never asked if they had an LTC. These decisions were made by the shelter operators with the help of the Office of Emergency Management. It is our opinion that decisions regarding the carrying of handguns by non-licensed persons during a state of disaster should reside with the county emergency, I've lost my place here, the county emergency board or emergency management council established by an executive order of the governor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
and we
you.
do have your written testimony,
Thank
which I've
you.
looked at. Thank you. Elva Mendoza.
Good morning. My name is Elva Mendoza. I'm here representing myself against HB 1177. I'm sure mothers were on all of our minds yesterday. I want to start by wishing you a happy belated Mother's Day. As a mother of three, I spent time thinking yesterday about how the things that I say or don't say, the things I do or don't do, affect my children and the messages they send. So, for example, if I'm looking at my phone while I'm talking to my child and they're talking to me, that sends the message that what you're saying is not very important to me, right? Or if someone's talking to each other while I'm talking. Likewise, when we pass bills like this, it sends the message to gun owners that they need not be responsible. I understand the bill author's concern about the potential for looting in an evacuation situation. It's a valid point. However, that's why gun organizations like the National Sport Shooting Foundation recommend that you use a gun safe. You should secure your firearms every day of the year, not just when there's a disaster approaching, because they are contributing at an alarming rate to shootings like Santa Fe, unintentional child shootings, suicides. So, bills like 1177 send the message that, you know what, even if you're going to be irresponsible and break the law, we're going to change the law to fit your needs. Instead of, hey, why don't you change your behavior to fit what's happening in our society today by encouraging responsible storage of firearms. Those who wish to carry their guns in an emergency, long guns are already permitted to be carried. That's not a problem. Handguns, the law is very clear on this. If you get your LTC, you are able to carry in public unless they are prohibited in certain places. So the recourse here is to educate responsible gun owners about preparing for disasters. I have a friend, Nori Leader, her octogenarian parents were evacuated by a stranger in a kayak, a kind stranger. She was just really worried about the possibility for permitless carry to take place 24 hours after a disaster when things are chaotic and people are stressful, and then you have unlicensed people who don't know how to make decisions about, how to handle threats with a gun, having firearms. So I just really urge you to send the message to gun owners that we need more responsibility, not less.
Thank you. Mr. Grisham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, my name is CJ Grisham. I'm here testifying for this bill on behalf of myself and Open Carry Texas. I'd like to thank the Texas legislature for recognizing that the right of the people to keep and bear arms in self-defense still exists, if even to just a minor degree. It's a shame that under this bill we must first lose everything before we gain an essential, fundamental, and inalienable right to self-defense. It's humbling to know that our legislators, who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, care so much about these liberties that it will graciously extend these protections to people who are dealing with the worst times of their lives so that they can defend themselves without having to jump through hoops and perform circus tricks. Currently, 36 states require or recognize the right of the people to keep and bear arms without a government permission slip or license to carry. Of those, 16 states currently allow 100% of the time what this bill purports to do for 48 hours after an emergency. In other words, Texas is one of only 14 states that requires a government permission slip before law-abiding citizens can exercise their right to self-defense, even in a disaster declaration. Meanwhile, criminals are carrying right now without a license, while honest, peaceful, law-abiding citizens wait for weeks and months for their government to process their lawful self-defense licenses. While we obviously support this bill and any bill that removes unconstitutional restrictions to our right to self-defense, this bill should not even be necessary. By amending this bill to apply to all law-abiding Texans all of the time, we can protect all Texans and not just those who lost everything to a devastating natural disaster. There are several concerns we have as written, as you're aware. There are still areas in Houston that are recovering from Hurricane Harvey 2 years later, not 48 hours later. This bill makes our right to self-defense contingent on a limited time frame and only requires a conscious decision by the governor to extend it. What is it about our politicians that they don't feel they can trust people that voted them into office while 36 other states do? Are Texans less responsible, less accountable, less trained, less trustworthy, or are we just simply more controlled?
Thank you, sir.